The stars burned cold above Kaleth Prime as Commander Kang Minho watched another world die. Through the bridge windows of the human flagship Defiance, he saw the planet's surface crack like broken glass. Great rivers of molten rock poured across, continents where billions of Veltar had lived just moments before. "Sir, we're detecting massive energy readings from the planet's core," reported Admiral Park Sora from her station. Her voice was steady, but Minho could hear the fear underneath. They had all seen this before, too many times. The Veltar homeworld shuddered once more, then simply stopped existing. Where a blue and green planet had orbited its sun for millions of years, now there was only empty space. Not even debris remained. It was as if the world had never been born at all. Minho closed his eyes and counted. That made 17 civilizations in the past year. 17 entire species wiped from existence by the being that called itself Lione. The ancient deity moved from system to system, judging whole races in moments and finding them all wanting. "Commander, incoming transmission on all frequencies," called Lieutenant Kim Day from the communications array. "It's him." The bridge fell silent. Every human in the resistance fleet knew what this meant. They had been running for months, gathering the scattered survivors of Earth's colonies, trying to stay ahead of the cosmic storm that was Lion's judgment. But now, their time had run out. The main screen flickered to life, but instead of showing space, it displayed something that hurt to look at directly. Lione appeared as a figure of pure light, shifting between forms too beautiful and terrible for human eyes to fully understand. When the deity spoke, its voice came from everywhere at once. "Humans of the Outer Rim." Lione's words echoed through the ship's hull itself. "Your species has been chosen for divine correction. You have spread across the stars like a disease, corrupting world after world with your violence and greed. The time has come for your removal from existence." Minho opened his eyes and stepped forward. Around him, his crew remained frozen at their stations. Some prayed quietly. Others simply stared at their screens, waiting for the end. But Minho found himself walking toward the view screen, his boots echoing in the sudden quiet. "Your resistance is meaningless," Lion continued. "I have unmade empires that spanned galaxies. I have silenced the songs of species older than your sun. What can humans possibly offer in their defense?" The commander stopped just a few feet from the screen. Up close, Lion's form was even more overwhelming. Patterns of light danced within light, creating shapes that suggested wings, eyes, hands, and things that had no names. The deity's presence pressed against Minho's mind like a weight trying to crush his thoughts. Behind him, Admiral Park Sora whispered urgently, "Sir, perhaps we should evacuate the civilian transports, give them a chance to escape." But Minho wasn't, listening to his second-in-command. He was studying Lione's shifting form, thinking about all the worlds he had seen die. The Kitharan merchants who built floating cities in their gas giants' clouds. The gentle moss people who sang to help their forest worlds grow. The crystalline genti who turned starlight into art. All gone. All judged unworthy by this being of terrible light. "You wish to speak?" Lione asked, somehow sensing Minho's attention. "Very well. What final words do the humans offer? What plea for mercy do you bring before divine judgment?" The bridge crew turned to look at their commander. Some nodded encouragingly, expecting him to beg for their lives or offer some desperate bargain. Others simply waited for him to say the words that might buy them a few more precious minutes of existence. Minho straightened his uniform and looked directly into the swirling patterns of Lione's form. When he spoke, his voice was calm and clear. "Why?" The single word seemed to hang in the air between them. Lion's shifting patterns slowed, then stopped entirely. For a moment, the deity's form became almost solid, resembling a tall figure in robes of woven starlight. "What did you say?" Lione asked. "I asked why," Minho replied. "Why do you destroy entire civilizations? Why do you judge species in moments and kill them all? Why do you believe you have the right to decide who lives and who dies?" The bridge was so quiet that Minho could hear his own heartbeat. Around him, his crew stared in shock. No one had ever questioned Lione before. The stories from other worlds all told the same tale. The deity appeared, pronounced judgment, and destroyed everything. There was never a conversation. Lione's form began to shift again, colors swirling faster now. When the deity spoke, there was something new in its voice, something that might have been surprise. You dare question divine will? You stand before the force that shaped the cosmos and ask why? Yes, Minho said simply. I ask why. The view screen flickered. Reality itself seemed to bend around Lione's presence as the deity processed this unprecedented response. In all the eons of existence, through all the civilizations that had pleaded and bargained and begged, no mortal had ever simply asked for an explanation. Interesting, Lion said finally. The word carried undertones that made the ship's metal hull ring like a bell. You do not beg for mercy. You do not offer tribute or try to prove your worth. You simply ask why. Minho nodded. Every species you've destroyed had families, dreams, art, love. They had children who played games and elders who told stories. They had scientists trying to understand the universe and artists trying to make it more beautiful. And you ended all of that in seconds. I think they deserve to know why. The deity's form pulsed with what might have been amusement or anger. And you believe you deserve an answer? I believe everyone deserves an answer, Minho replied. That's what makes us different from gods, I suppose. We ask questions instead of just making declarations. For a long moment, Lion said nothing. The silence stretched across space, touching every ship in the human fleet. Then, slowly, the deity began to smile. It was not a pleasant expression. Very well, human, Lion said. Your question intrigues me. Perhaps you are worth testing before your destruction. We shall see if your curiosity survives what comes next. The view screen went dark, leaving only stars and the memory of terrible light. The cold hit Minho like a wall of ice. One moment he was standing on the bridge of the Defiance, surrounded by his crew and the familiar hum of ship systems. The next moment he was alone on a barren moon, wearing only his uniform and breathing recycled air from a basic survival pack. Above him, 3 small suns cast harsh shadows across the rocky landscape. The ground was covered in sharp stones and patches of frozen crystals that cut through his boots with each step. In the distance, jagged mountains reached toward a sky the color of old blood. 7 cycles. Lion's voice echoed from everywhere and nowhere. Survive for 7 cycles and I will hear your question properly. Fail, and your species dies with you. Minho looked around the wasteland. No water, no shelter, no food except for the emergency rations in his pack, which would last maybe 2 days if he was careful. The survival pack also contained a basic medical kit, a small heat generator and a water recycler that might give him a few more days if he could find ice to melt. He started walking toward the mountains. If there was shelter anywhere on this moon, it would be in the rocks. As he walked, memories came back to him like old friends. He remembered the day the news reached Earth about the first colony world that Lione had destroyed. New Shanghai, a mining planet where his sister had worked. The report said the planet just vanished in a flash of light. No survivors, no warning. Just gone. His parents had died in the second wave of attacks when Lione came to Earth itself. The deity had appeared over major cities, declaring humanity corrupt and violent. Most of Earth burned that day, but some people escaped in ships fleeing to the outer colonies. Minho had been commanding a supply run to Mars when it happened. When he returned to find Earth mostly lifeless, he made a choice. Instead of running, further he gathered the survivors. Instead of hiding, he organized them into a resistance, not to fight Lione with weapons because that was impossible, but to save as many people as he could. The first night on the moon was the worst. The temperature dropped so low that the crystals on the ground sang as they cracked. Minho huddled in a shallow cave he had found, using the heat generator to stay alive. But the device was running low on power, and he knew it would not last 7 cycles. On the second day, he found ice. It was buried deep under the rocks, but the water recycler could work with it. That bought him time, but not much. The emergency rations were already half gone. He kept walking, looking for anything that might help, and as he walked, he thought about the other species Lione had destroyed. He had met refugees from some of them during his time organizing the resistance. The Feltar had been traders and artists. Their cities were beautiful, built into the sides of mountains with gardens that bloomed in impossible colors. The Catharan were scientists who had almost solved the puzzle of faster-than-light communication. The Moss people wrote poetry that could make you cry just by listening to the rhythm of their words. All of them had families. All of them had children who laughed and played games. All of them had built something beautiful and unique in the universe. And Lione had ended it all without explanation. By the fourth day, Minho was delirious from hunger and cold. His lips were cracked, his hands were bleeding from climbing over sharp rocks, and his vision kept blurring. But he kept asking the same question over and over. Why? He asked it to the empty sky. He asked it to the rocks under his feet. He asked it to the 3 suns that gave light but no warmth. Why do you kill children who never hurt anyone? Why do you destroy art and music and stories? Why do you think death is the answer to everything? On the 5th day, he found something strange. Hidden in a deep canyon was the remains of a building. It was old, older than human civilization, built by some species that had lived on this moon, long ago. The walls were covered in symbols that looked like writing, but Minho could not read them. Inside the building, he found bones. Not human bones, but the remains of creatures that had once been alive. They were arranged carefully as if someone had buried them with respect. Near the bones was a small device that still worked. When Minho touched it, it projected images into the air. The images showed the creatures who had once lived here. They looked like tall birds with 4 arms and silver feathers. The images showed them building cities, raising children, creating art. They looked happy. Then the images showed Lione arriving. The bird creatures tried to run, but there was nowhere to go. In the final image, they were gone, leaving only empty buildings and silence. Minho sat among the bones and cried, not for himself, but for all the species that had died, asking the same question he was asking. Why? On the 6th day, his body began to shut down. The cold was too much, the hunger too deep. He could barely walk, but he crawled to the top of a hill and looked up at the stars. Somewhere out there, his crew was waiting. Admiral Park Sora would be trying to find a way to rescue him. Lieutenant Kim Day would be monitoring all frequencies for any sign of hope. Sergeant Lee Nari would be preparing the civilian transports for another desperate escape. They were good people. They deserved better than this. As the 6th night fell and the temperature dropped toward killing cold, Minho closed his eyes. He was not afraid of dying. He was only sad that he would never get to hear Lione's answer to his question. But even as his body began to fail, he kept whispering the same word over and over again. Why? 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 The word echoed across the empty moon, carrying all the grief of a universe full of extinct civilizations. And somewhere in the darkness between stars, an ancient deity heard that whisper and felt something it had never felt before. Doubt. Warmth flowed through Minho's body like liquid sunlight. His cracked lips healed. His bleeding hands became whole. The terrible cold that had been killing him slowly faded away, replaced by comfortable heat that seemed to come from inside his own bones. He opened his eyes and found himself standing in a place that was not quite real. The ground beneath his feet looked like polished black stone, but when he looked closer, he could see stars moving in its depths. The sky above was the color of deep ocean water, filled with lights that were too beautiful to be simple stars. Lione stood before him, no longer the overwhelming figure of pure light from the ship's view screen. The deity had taken a form that was easier for human eyes to understand. It looked like a tall person wearing robes made of woven starlight, with a face that was both ancient and ageless. But the eyes were still too bright, still too deep, still holding the weight of eons. "You have impressed me, human," Lion said. "In all my existence, no mortal has shown such persistence in the face of certain death. You kept asking your question even as your body failed. So I will honor my promise. Ask your question and I will answer." Minho stood up slowly. He felt strong again, healthier than he had been in years. But he could still remember the cold, the hunger, the bones of the bird creatures who had died asking the same question. Why do you destroy entire civilizations, he asked. Why do you judge whole species in moments and kill them all? Lione nodded as if he had expected this question. I destroy them because they are flawed. Look at the evidence, human. The Veltar were traitors, but they also sold weapons to warring planets. The Catharan were scientists, but they used their knowledge to build machines that enslaved other species. The Moss people wrote beautiful poetry, but they also practiced ritual sacrifice of their young. And that justifies killing everyone? Minho asked. Every child, every innocent person, every artist and healer and teacher? The corruption runs too deep, Lion replied. When a species falls to darkness, it cannot be redeemed. It is better to end their suffering quickly and allow the universe to begin again with cleaner forms of life. Minho thought about this answer. It sounded reasonable on the surface, but something about it bothered him. Who decides what makes a species flawed? The question seemed to catch Lione off guard. The deity's form flickered slightly like a candle flame in wind. I decide. I am divine. I see all things clearly. But who gave you the right to decide? Minho pressed. Who appointed you as judge of all life in the universe? I have always been, Lion said, but there was something defensive in the deity's voice now. I existed before the first stars were born. I shaped the laws that govern reality itself. Who else could judge but me? Maybe no one should judge at all, Minho suggested. Maybe species should be allowed to grow and change and find their own way. Leone's eyes flashed with something that might have been anger. You speak of things you do not understand. I have watched civilizations rise and fall for millions of years. I have seen the same patterns repeat endlessly. Species develop technology, become proud, grow violent, and then destroy themselves and everything around them. It is better to end the cycle before the destruction spreads. But what if you're wrong? Minho asked. What if some of those species would have found better ways if you had given them time? I am not wrong, Lion said firmly. I am divine. I do not make mistakes. Minho walked closer to the deity. Here, in this strange place between realities, he felt no fear. Tell me about humanity, then. What makes us so flawed that we deserve to die? Lione gestured, and images appeared in the air around them. Scenes of human history played out like movies. Wars, crimes, environmental destruction, cruelty, greed, all the worst moments of human civilization displayed in painful detail. Look at your species, Lione said. You have fought constant wars throughout your history. You have poisoned your own planet. You have enslaved each other, murdered each other, betrayed each other. You spread across the stars and bring your violence with you. How can such a species be allowed to continue? Minho watched the images for a moment, then asked another question. Why are you only showing me the bad parts? The images froze. Lione turned to look at him with surprise. What do you mean? You're showing me human wars but not human peace treaties. You're showing me human crimes but not human justice. You're showing me human cruelty but not human kindness. Why only the darkness? Because the darkness is what matters, Lione replied. It is proof of corruption. Is it? Minho asked. Or is it just proof that we're still learning? The deity's form began to shift again, patterns of light swirling more rapidly. Learning? You have had thousands of years to learn. How much time does a species need? How much time do you need? Minho shot back. You've existed for millions of years, and you're still making the same choice over and over again. Destroy everything instead of trying to help it grow. If we're flawed for being violent, what does that make you? The question hit Lione like a physical blow. The deity staggered backward, form becoming less solid. For a moment, the beautiful face showed something that looked almost like pain. That is different, Lione said quietly. I destroy to preserve the greater good. Do you? Minho asked. Or do you destroy because it's easier than trying to understand? The space around them began to tremble. The polished stone floor cracked. The star-filled sky flickered like a broken screen. Something was happening to the reality they stood in, as if the very foundations were becoming unstable. "You ask dangerous questions, human," Lione whispered. "Good questions usually are dangerous," Minho replied. "They make us think about things we'd rather ignore." In the distance, both of them could hear something like thunder. But it was not the sound of a storm. It was the sound of certainty beginning to crack. And for the first time in eons of existence, the god called Lione began to wonder if destroying civilizations was really the right answer. The interrogation was just beginning. The cracks in reality grew wider. Through the gaps, Minho could see glimpses of normal space where the human fleet waited. Captain Yoon Ji-won would be monitoring strange energy readings. Dr. Han Minji would be trying to understand what was happening to the fundamental laws of physics around their location. But here, in this place between dimensions, a god was learning to doubt for the first time. Leon's form had become less stable, shifting between the robed figure and something more abstract. Colors that had no name swirled through the deity's outline. When Lione spoke, the voice carried harmonics that made the broken ground beneath them sing. "You want to know why I judge species so quickly?" Lione asked. "Very well. I will show you." The space around them changed. Now they stood on a world of crystal spires and floating gardens. Beautiful beings with wings like stained glass moved through the air, creating art from pure light. Their cities were works of wonder that made human architecture look like children's blocks. "The seraphim," Lione said. "The first species I chose not to destroy. I saw their beauty and decided they were worth preserving. Do you want to know what happened?" The scene shifted. The crystal spires were now weapons. The floating gardens had become factories that pumped poison into the sky. The beautiful winged beings were locked in brutal war, using their light-shaping abilities to burn each other from the inside out. "They destroyed themselves within 1,000 years, Lion continued. "But first they spread to other worlds. They enslaved 12 species and drove 6 more to extinction, all because I thought they were too beautiful to judge." Minho watched the destruction play out around them. It was horrible, but it was also just one example. So because one species failed, all species must be destroyed before they get the chance to try? "You do not understand," Lione said. "I have seen this pattern hundreds of times. Species grow powerful, become corrupt, cause suffering on a galactic scale. It is better to end them while they are still small." "But that's like killing all children because some adults become criminals," Minho replied. "You're punishing entire civilizations for crimes they haven't committed yet." The crystal world faded away, replaced by images of other species. Lione showed him the hive builders who created beautiful living cities, then turned them into prisons for their own people. The song weavers who made music that could heal minds, then used it to drive their enemies insane. The star dancers who learned to live in the vacuum of space, then used that ability to destroy space stations by ripping holes in their hulls. "Every species follows the same path," Lione insisted. "Beauty becomes corruption. Wisdom becomes cruelty. Hope becomes despair. It is the nature of mortal life. Or maybe," Minho said slowly, "it's the nature of life that doesn't get guidance." Lione's shifting form went very still. "What do you mean?" "You show up, judge a species in moments, and then either destroy them or leave them alone completely. But what if there was a third option? What if instead of being a judge, you tried being a teacher?" "I am not a teacher," Lione replied. "I am a force of cosmic order." "Says who?" Minho asked. "Who told you that's what you had to be?" The question hung in the air between them. For a long moment, Lione said nothing. When the deity finally spoke, the voice was quieter than before. "No one told me. I simply was. When I first became aware, the universe was young and chaotic. Stars were being born and dying randomly. Planets formed and were destroyed by cosmic accidents. Life appeared and was snuffed out by radiation and asteroid impacts. So I began to impose order. And imposing order meant deciding who lives and who dies. Someone had to make the hard choices, Lion said, but now the words sounded like an old argument that the deity had been having with itself for eons. Someone had to prevent the suffering that comes from unchecked growth and expansion. Minho walked closer to the shifting figure. "Let me tell you about suffering," he said. "I grew up on Earth during the resource wars. My neighborhood was bombed 3 times before I turned 10. I watched my best friend die from a disease that could have been cured if the medicine hadn't been too expensive. I joined the military because it was the only way to get enough food to eat." Images from Minho's memories began to appear around them, replacing Leone's examples of cosmic destruction with smaller, more personal moments of pain. "But you know what else I saw?" Minho continued. "I saw soldiers sharing their rations with hungry children. I saw doctors working for free in refugee camps. I saw people who had lost everything still finding ways to help others. Yes, humans do terrible things, but we also do beautiful things. Sometimes the same person does both." "That proves nothing," Lion said, but the deity's voice lacked conviction. "Now, it proves that good and evil aren't permanent states," Minho replied. "They're choices that individuals make every day. You can't judge an entire species based on their worst moments any more than you can judge them based on their best ones." The space around them shuddered again. Through the growing cracks, Minho could see other figures beginning to appear. Beings, of light and energy, but different from Lione. These were other divine entities, drawn by the cosmic disturbance of a god having its fundamental beliefs challenged. "Something is wrong with Lione," one of them whispered in a voice like solar wind. "The certainty is breaking," said another, its form resembling a galaxy in constant motion. "This has never happened before," added a third, whose appearance shifted through geometric patterns that hurt to look at directly. Lione noticed the gathering of divine witnesses and seemed to grow more agitated. The deity's form began to expand, becoming less human-like and more abstract. "You see," Lione said to Minho, "even the other powers of creation are concerned. What you are doing threatens the cosmic order itself." "Maybe the cosmic order needs to be threatened," Minho replied calmly. "Maybe it's been wrong this whole time." The words hit the assembled divine beings like a shockwave. Several of them recoiled, their forms becoming less stable. But others leaned forward as if hearing something they had never considered before. "Impossible," Lion said, but the word came out as barely a whisper. "Is it?" Minho asked. "You've been destroying civilizations for millions of years, and what has it accomplished? Are the surviving species any better? Is the universe any more peaceful? Or are you just creating a galaxy full of scared populations who live in terror of divine judgment?" For the first time since their conversation began, Lione had no immediate answer. The deity's form continued to shift and change, as if the very concept of identity was becoming unstable. And in that moment of divine uncertainty, something unprecedented happened. Lione began to weep. The tears were not water, but drops of pure starlight that fell upward into the cracked sky. Each tear carried the weight of eons, the memory of countless civilizations destroyed in the name of cosmic order. "I don't know," Lion whispered, and the admission shook the foundations of reality itself. "I don't know if I was right. I don't know if there was a better way. I don't know anything anymore." The gathered divine beings watched in shock as the most certain among them discovered doubt. And Minho, the human who had started it all with a simple question, stepped forward to offer comfort to a crying god. The tears of starlight continued to fall upward, each drop carrying the memory of a destroyed world. Minho watched as the god who had seemed so certain, so powerful, so absolute in judgment, collapsed under the weight of doubt. The other divine beings whispered among themselves in languages made of gravity waves and quantum fluctuations. Some seemed angry, others curious, and a few appeared to be experiencing their own moments of uncertainty. "This is what your questions have done," Lione said through the tears. "You have broken something that was meant to be eternal." "Maybe it needed to break," Minho replied gently. He reached out, not quite touching the shifting form of the deity, but offering the gesture of comfort. Maybe being eternal doesn't mean being right. Lione looked at the human hand extended toward a god, and something in that simple act of kindness seemed to complete the transformation that had been building throughout their conversation. "I was afraid," Lione whispered, and the admission sent shockwaves through the assembled divine beings. "From the very beginning I was afraid. The universe was so chaotic, so unpredictable. Life forms appeared and evolved in ways I could not control or understand. So I decided that control was the answer, that judgment was necessary, that I had to choose who lived and who died before they could make choices that might hurt others." "Fear isn't evil," Minho said. "It's just fear. What matters is what you do with it." "But I let fear make me into a destroyer," Lione continued. "I told myself it was for the greater good, but really it was because I was terrified of what might happen. If I let life grow wild and free." The space around them began to stabilize as Lione's emotional state calmed. The cracks in reality started to seal themselves, but the fundamental change in the deity remained. The overwhelming presence of absolute authority was gone, replaced by something more complex and more human. "What happens now?" Lione asked. "How does a god who has been wrong for eons make amends?" Minho thought about this question carefully. Around them, the other divine beings waited for his answer with the same attention they might give to cosmic law. "You start over," he said finally. "You learn to ask questions instead of making judgments. You offer guidance instead of destruction. You remember that making mistakes is part of growing, even for gods." "And the species I have already destroyed?" Lione asked. "The countless civilizations that died because of my fear?" "You can't bring them back," Minho said sadly. "But you can make sure their deaths weren't meaningless by doing better with the species that remain." Lione nodded slowly, and as the deity accepted this truth, the last of the tears fell upward into the healing sky. "Will you help me?" Lion asked. "Will humanity teach a god how to learn instead of judge?" Minho smiled. "That's what we're good at. Making mistakes, learning from them, and trying to do better tomorrow." The strange space between dimensions faded away, and suddenly Minho was back on the bridge of the Defiance. Admiral Park Sora rushed to his side, followed by the rest of his crew. They looked older, more tired, as if weeks had passed instead of the few hours Minho remembered. "Sir, you've been gone for 27 days, Park Sora reported. "We've been trying to find you, but our sensors couldn't locate anything. Then suddenly you were just back." 27 days. Minho looked around the bridge in confusion. It felt like hours. "Time moves differently in the spaces between realities," came a familiar voice. Lione appeared on the main view screen, but the deity looked different now. Still powerful, still magnificent, but no longer terrible. The harsh light had been replaced by something warmer, more welcoming. "People of the human fleet," Lione announced. "I have come to offer you something that I have never offered before. Not judgment, but partnership. Not destruction, but the chance to grow together." Lieutenant Kim Day stared at his instruments in amazement. "Sir, I'm reading massive energy signatures throughout the galaxy. It's like reality itself is shifting." "Because it is," Lione explained. "I am no longer destroying civilizations that make mistakes. Instead, I am appearing to them as a guide and teacher. The Kitharan survivors are already working with me to rebuild their science in more ethical ways. The remaining Veltar are learning to trade in knowledge instead of weapons. Even the Moss people are finding ways to honor their dead without sacrificing. They're living." Dr. Han Minji stepped forward, her scientific mind struggling to process what she was hearing. "You're saying that you've changed your entire approach to cosmic governance because Commander Minho asked you why?" "Not just because he asked," Lion replied, "but because he kept asking, because he refused to accept easy answers, because he showed me that doubt and questioning are not weaknesses, but the foundation of wisdom." Major Shin Hayek, who had been quietly monitoring the conversation, spoke up. "What does this mean for humanity?" Lion's form on the screen seemed to smile. "It means that your species will be given the same chance as all others, to grow, to learn, to make mistakes and recover from them. but it also means that you will have responsibilities. You will help me learn how to guide without controlling, how to teach without judging. Minho stepped forward. We accept, he said without hesitation, but on one condition. The bridge fell silent. Even after everything that had happened, the idea of making demands of a god seemed impossible. What condition? Lione asked. That you remember what you learned here, Minho replied. That you never stop asking questions even when the answers are difficult. That you never let certainty make you cruel again. Lione was quiet for a long moment. Then the deity nodded. I promise, and I will hold you to the same standard. Humanity must continue to grow, to question, to doubt even their own beliefs when necessary. Deal, Minho said, extending his hand toward the view screen as if to shake hands with a god. Light flowed from the screen and briefly surrounded Minho's hand, warm and gentle. Around them, the crew watched in amazement as their commander made a pact with the being who had once planned to destroy them all. The war is over, Lion announced, not because one side won, but because both sides learned something new. The human asked why, and the god discovered that having no answer was the beginning of wisdom. As the transmission ended, Minho looked around at his crew. They were still processing what had happened, still trying to understand how a simple question had changed the fate of the entire universe. Admiral Park, he said finally. Set course for home. We have a lot of people to tell about what happened. Here. What did happen here, sir? She asked. Minho thought about the question that had started it all, about the god who learned to doubt, about the power of admitting ignorance. We learned that the most dangerous weapon in the universe isn't a gun or a bomb, he said. It's a question, and the most powerful force isn't destruction or creation. What is it then? Lieutenant Kim Day asked. Minho smiled as he looked out at the stars where civilizations that had been scheduled for destruction were now free to grow and learn and make their own mistakes. Curiosity, he said. The willingness to ask why, even when you're afraid of the answer. And across the galaxy, on worlds that had lived in terror of divine judgment, people looked up at the sky and saw not the light of destruction, but the gentle glow of a god who had learned to doubt, to question, and to grow. The war was over. The conversation had just begun.